Formula One has crowned dozens of world champions. Some dominated for years. Some rewrote the record books. Some became global superstars. But one man achieved something even rarer. He never became world champion. Yet more than 40 years after his death, Ferrari fans still speak his name with a kind of respect that many champions never earned. His name was Gilles Villeneuve. To some, he was the bravest driver Formula One had ever seen. To others, he was simply fearless. A man who attacked every corner as if nothing in the world could stop him. But there was another side to his story. A broken promise. A friendship that turned into betrayal, and one decision that changed Formula One forever. Because the truth is, Gilles Villeneuve didn't lose his life because he lacked talent. He lost it after a chain of events that began long before his final lap. So what really happened to Gilles Villeneuve? To answer that, we have to go back to a frozen country where racing wasn't measured by trophies, but by survival. Long before Ferrari, long before Formula One, long before the world knew his name, Gilles Villeneuve was racing across frozen lakes in Quebec, Canada. Not in sleek Formula One cars, but on snowmobiles. It sounds like an unusual beginning for one of motorsport's greatest legends. Yet those icy tracks shaped everything that made Gilles different. Snowmobile racing demanded instincts that couldn't be taught. The surfaces changed every second. Grip disappeared without warning. One tiny mistake could send a rider flying across solid ice. Most competitors learned caution. Gilles learned confidence. He developed lightning-fast reactions and an almost unbelievable ability to control machines that constantly threatened to throw him off. More importantly, he discovered something about himself. He wasn't afraid of danger. He welcomed it. While other racers searched for the safest line, Gilles often searched for the fastest one. Sometimes it worked brilliantly. Sometimes it ended in spectacular crashes. But every accident taught him something new. Friends remembered that no matter how badly he crashed, Gilles always wanted to know one thing first. How fast was I going? That attitude would define the rest of his life. For Gilles, fear wasn't something to obey. It was something to defeat. As his confidence grew, so did his ambition. Snowmobiles could only take him so far. If he truly wanted to prove himself against the best drivers in the world, he needed 4 wheels instead of 2 tracks. It was a risk few people believed would succeed. But Gilles had never cared much about other people's expectations. Moving into car racing wasn't easy. Unlike many future Formula One drivers, Gilles didn't come from enormous wealth or a famous racing family. Every opportunity had to be earned. Every race weekend mattered. Every mechanical failure felt like a disaster. There were moments when continuing seemed almost impossible. Money was always tight. Equipment wasn't always competitive. Yet none of it changed the way Gilles drove. If anything, it made him even more aggressive. He raced every lap as though another chance might never come. Spectators quickly noticed there was something unusual about this young Canadian. He didn't calculate risks the way everyone else did. He simply attacked. Cars slid sideways through corners. Late braking became normal. Impossible overtakes somehow became expected. Sometimes it looked completely out of control. Then, somehow, he emerged in front. People couldn't always explain how he did it. They only knew they couldn't stop watching. His performances in Formula Atlantic transformed him from an unknown hopeful into one of the most exciting young talents in North America. Race after race, Gilles wasn't just winning. He was entertaining. Crowds came expecting drama because whenever Villeneuve climbed into a car, something unforgettable usually happened. That reputation slowly spread beyond Canada. Soon, even people in Europe began hearing about the fearless Canadian who drove as though every race was the last of his life. One name eventually reached his ears: James Hunt. The reigning Formula One world champion had seen enough to believe this young Canadian deserved something much bigger. It wasn't a guarantee of success, but it was the first door that opened toward Formula One. And once Gilles stepped through it, there would be no turning back. Formula One in the late 1970s was one of the most dangerous sports on Earth. Safety barriers were primitive. Medical responses were far slower than today's standards. Drivers accepted risks that would seem unimaginable now, even among those fearless competitors. Gilles Villeneuve stood apart. When he made his Formula One debut, few people expected him to become a legend. He had limited experience compared with established stars. He was smaller than many rivals. He wasn't considered the polished future champion journalists usually predicted. But first impressions never bothered Gilles. He believed speed spoke louder than reputation, and he was about to prove it. One opportunity led to another until the biggest name in Formula One began paying attention: Ferrari. For most drivers, joining Ferrari represented the dream. For Gilles, it represented something even greater: an opportunity to race for Enzo Ferrari himself. The man who had built the most famous team in motorsport history rarely gave opportunities away. He demanded commitment, discipline, and absolute courage. Somehow, when Enzo looked at Gilles Villeneuve, he saw something that reminded him of the fearless racers from Formula One's earliest years. He wasn't searching for perfection. He was searching for heart. Gilles had plenty of it. When Ferrari offered him a place, many people questioned the decision. Why choose an inexperienced Canadian over more established names? The answer would become obvious sooner than anyone expected. Because Gilles Villeneuve didn't drive like everyone else. He drove as though limits simply didn't exist. And before long, the Tifosi would fall completely in love with him. The moment Gilles Villeneuve climbed into a Ferrari, something changed. He wasn't the most experienced driver on the grid. He wasn't the most polished, and he certainly wasn't the safest. But none of that mattered, because every time the Canadian lowered his visor, fans knew they were about to witness something extraordinary. Gilles never believed racing was about protecting points. He believed it was about giving absolutely everything. If there was even the smallest gap, he attacked it. If the rear of the car stepped out, he fought it instead of lifting off the throttle. And if victory required taking risks others considered impossible, he took them without hesitation. It didn't always end with a trophy. Sometimes it ended with a damaged Ferrari sitting in the gravel. But even then, the crowd stood and applauded. They weren't watching a driver. They were watching pure courage. Ferrari's passionate supporters, the Tifosi, quickly embraced him as one of their own. To them, Gilles represented everything Ferrari was supposed to be: passion, aggression, heart. He didn't calculate races like a mathematician. He raced with instinct. That instinct produced moments that are still replayed decades later. Wheel-to-wheel battles, impossible overtakes, cars sliding sideways at unbelievable speeds. There were races where finishing seemed impossible, yet somehow Gilles dragged the Ferrari across the line. Even rival drivers admitted there was something unique about him. You never really knew what he would do next. That unpredictability made him both spectacular and dangerous to race against. Yet inside Ferrari, another story was quietly beginning. One that had nothing to do with speed and everything to do with trust. In 1981, Didier Pironi joined Ferrari. Like Gilles, Pironi was fast, confident, ambitious. At first, the two men appeared to get along well. They joked together, worked together, shared information about the cars. From the outside, Ferrari seemed to have built one of Formula One's strongest driver pairings. But Formula One has always been a sport where friendships survive only as long as victories are shared. The moment both drivers realize only one of them can stand on the top step, everything changes. Still, Gilles believed there were lines teammates simply didn't cross, especially inside Ferrari. Back then, unwritten rules mattered almost as much as written contracts. If the team issued an order, drivers were expected to respect it. Gilles believed Pironi understood those rules. He couldn't have imagined how quickly that belief would disappear. Because in 1982, Formula One arrived at the San Marino Grand Prix, a weekend that would change Gilles Villeneuve forever. The race itself unfolded under unusual circumstances. Several leading teams had withdrawn due to political disputes. Only a handful of genuine contenders remained. Ferrari suddenly found itself in complete control. Victory looked almost certain. With only a few laps remaining, the team signaled both drivers to slow down and preserve the cars. The message appeared simple. Don't race each other. Bring home a comfortable 1-2 finish. Gilles immediately backed off. He believed the race was effectively over. He assumed the order applied equally to both Ferraris. Then, everything changed. Without warning, Didier Pironi accelerated. He attacked. He passed Gilles. At first, Gilles thought it was just temporary. Surely Pironi would hand the position back before the finish. Instead, he kept pushing. The two Ferraris swapped places several more times, each move becoming more aggressive than the last. Gilles still believed his teammate was only putting on a show for the spectators. Until the final lap. Pironi crossed the finish line first. Gilles finished second. To millions watching, Ferrari had celebrated another 1-2 finish. Inside Gilles Villeneuve's mind, something had just shattered. He climbed out of the car, convinced he had been betrayed. Not beaten, betrayed. Because from his perspective, he had obeyed the team's instructions. Pironi had not. Friends later described Gilles as devastated rather than angry. He kept repeating the same belief. Pironi had broken an agreement between teammates. From that moment onward, Gilles reportedly vowed he would never trust Didier Pironi again. Some people inside Ferrari insisted the team orders had been misunderstood. Others believed Pironi had done nothing technically wrong. The debate continues even today. But one fact has never been disputed. Gilles left Imola carrying a level of emotional pain few had ever seen in him. The smiling Canadian was gone. And the driver who arrived at the next Grand Prix was no longer racing only against his rivals. He was racing against disappointment, against anger, and perhaps against himself. Just 2 weeks later, Formula One arrived in Belgium. On the surface, everything looked normal. The championship continued. Mechanics prepared the cars. Journalists filled the paddock. Fans waited for another thrilling weekend. But beneath that routine, Gilles Villeneuve was still thinking about San Marino. Those closest to him noticed the difference. The usual laughter was missing. His focus had become unusually intense. He wasn't interested in discussing politics inside Ferrari. He wanted one thing: to prove he was still the faster Ferrari driver. Qualifying at Zolder became more than a fight for pole position. It became something personal. Every lap mattered. Every tenth of a second mattered. Not because of the championship, because of pride. Early in qualifying, Gilles posted a competitive time. For many drivers, it would have been enough. Not for him. When Pironi improved his own lap, Gilles immediately wanted another attempt. He wasn't prepared to finish behind his teammate again. Mechanics checked the Ferrari. Fuel was added. Fresh tires were fitted. The Canadian climbed back into the cockpit. Nobody in the garage could have known they were watching him prepare for the final run of his life. As Gilles accelerated onto the circuit, he pushed exactly the way everyone expected. Flat out, fearless, searching for tiny fractions of a second. Ahead of him, slower traffic waited. Just another normal challenge during qualifying, something Formula One drivers dealt with every weekend. But within moments, a chain of split-second decisions would produce one of the darkest days in the history of the sport. As Gilles Villeneuve charged toward another flying lap, his Ferrari was traveling at extraordinary speed. Ahead of him was German driver Jochen Mass. Mass had just completed his own fast lap and was moving aside to let the Ferrari through. It was something every driver did countless times during qualifying. Normally, both drivers would anticipate each other's movements. Normally, nothing happened. This time, everything happened at once. Gilles committed to one side of the track. At almost the same instant, Mass moved in the same direction to make room. Neither driver intended contact. Neither driver even had enough time to react. At speeds approaching 230 kilometers per hour, fractions of a second are all you have. The Ferrari struck the rear of Mass's car. The impact launched Villeneuve's Ferrari violently into the air. For a brief moment, the car wasn't driving anymore. It was flying. The Ferrari flipped end over end across the circuit, breaking apart with every rotation. The force of the crash threw Gilles from the cockpit before the remains of the car slammed back into the ground. The circuit fell silent. Marshals ran toward the wreckage. Drivers slowed in disbelief. Nobody needed to be told how serious the accident was, even in an era where terrible crashes were tragically familiar. This one felt different. Medical teams reached Gilles within seconds. He was still alive. But his injuries were catastrophic. He was rushed by helicopter to a nearby hospital while the Formula One paddock waited for news that everyone desperately wanted to hear. It never came. Later that evening, doctors confirmed what millions of fans feared. Gilles Villeneuve had died. He was only 32 years old. The fearless driver who always seemed impossible to stop had raced for the final time. The news spread through Formula One with unbelievable speed. Shock quickly turned into heartbreak. Mechanics stood speechless. Journalists struggled to find the right words. Fans gathered outside Ferrari carrying flowers, flags, and photographs of the man they had come to love. For Ferrari, the loss was almost impossible to comprehend. Enzo Ferrari had seen many great drivers wear red. But Gilles was different. He wasn't simply another employee. He represented the spirit Enzo admired most. Courage without compromise. Even today, people continue asking the same question. What really happened? Was it simply an unfortunate racing accident? Or did the events of San Marino play a larger role than anyone could measure? The physical cause of the crash is well documented. The closing speed between Villeneuve and Jochen Mass left almost no time for either driver to react. Both men made split-second decisions that, by terrible coincidence, placed them on the same piece of asphalt. There is no credible evidence of sabotage, no conspiracy, no deliberate wrongdoing. Jochen Mass himself carried the emotional burden of that day for many years, despite having done nothing intentionally harmful. But the psychological story is far more complicated. Just 2 weeks earlier, Gilles had walked away from Imola convinced that the teammate he trusted most had betrayed him. Friends described him as deeply hurt, not because he had lost a race, but because he believed trust had been broken. When qualifying began in Belgium, Gilles wasn't simply chasing pole position. He was chasing redemption. He wanted to prove, to Ferrari, to Pironi, and perhaps to himself, that he was still the fastest driver in the team. History can never tell us whether that determination caused him to push harder than usual. No one can know exactly what was in his mind during those final moments. But what we do know is this. The crash did not begin at the moment his Ferrari touched Jochen Mass's car. The chain of events had already been set in motion weeks earlier at San Marino. That painful weekend changed the emotional state of one of Formula One's most fearless drivers. And sometimes, the smallest emotional wounds can lead to the biggest consequences. Yet despite the tragedy, Gilles Villeneuve's story did not end at Zolder. In many ways, that was where his legend truly began. Unlike most drivers, Gilles is remembered for far more than statistics. His record shows only 6 Grand Prix victories. He never became world champion. On paper, those numbers don't place him alongside Formula One's greatest champions. But Formula One has never been remembered through numbers alone. It is remembered through moments, through courage, through drivers who made people feel something every time they stepped into a racing car. Few embodied that better than Gilles Villeneuve. Ferrari supporters never forgot him. His aggressive style became the standard by which future Ferrari heroes were judged. Years later, when his son Jacques Villeneuve reached Formula One and eventually became world champion, the Villeneuve name once again stood at the top of motorsport. Yet even Jacques understood something remarkable. His father's legacy had never depended on winning titles. In Canada, the Circuit Ile Notre Dame was renamed Circuit Gilles Villeneuve, ensuring future generations would pass beneath his name every racing season. Drivers who never had the chance to compete against him still speak about him with admiration. Historians continue ranking him among the sport's greatest natural talents, not because of championships, because of the way he raced. Because every lap looked like it might become the greatest lap anyone had ever seen, or his last. Perhaps that's why Gilles Villeneuve remains unforgettable. He reminded the world that greatness isn't always measured by trophies. Sometimes it is measured by the courage to give everything, even when victory isn't guaranteed. Formula One has produced many champions. Only a handful became legends. Gilles Villeneuve became one of those legends, not because he conquered Formula One, but because he gave everything he had to it. And more than 4 decades later, the sound of his Ferrari may have faded, but the story of the fearless Canadian who refused to lift still echoes through every corner of the sport.